Okay, so I'm just going to make a quick little video here, mostly for myself, I guess. So this right here is how one of my textbooks showed, quite literally, right, with all these logic gates, I just copied it. So how my textbook showed how to make an edge-triggered D-flop that didn't use, like, you know, an actual capacitor or some sort of component to generate a, like, tiny pulse of a 1 that would count as like a really fine edge. So this is, it's edge triggered, but not relying on a very fine edge. The edge, any clock signal, right, you can just go on and then it won't change it. And similarly, you go off and it won't change. Only on the rising edge it'll actually change it. So this works, but this is really complicated for me to understand. I was trying to break it down and look at this as like, this is an SR latch, and then try and find, you know, the bits of abstraction in here that I could sort of comprehend in pieces, but I don't know, my brain's not that big, right? So like I just kind of took a step back and tried to think about, all right, from what I know about how this is for me, right? So I'm just thinking. So basically, in any case, I know how a D latch works, right? How a D latch is just a gated SR latch where you have the data in and the enable pin, and then the output. So the enable just makes it transparent or not. When it's enabled, it outputs its input. When it's not enabled, it latches onto whatever that was when it gets disabled. So that I understand, and I know how to make that with an SR latch and some gating in the front, some NANDs in the front, or ANDs in this case. So if that component is well understood, then I'm not so concerned with understanding the whole tangle of things at once, but at least if I can understand pieces that build upon to make the whole, then I'm content. So in understanding a data latch, or a D latch, right, then we can understand how to make a D flop, which simply is, of course, reliant on a rising clock edge to change at all. So the way that this works, and I think this is a lot more understandable than this, is that we have this. So we have an inverter, and there's just a buffer. So I only put the buffer here so that the timing and logic world is going to be the same between sending the clock here and sending the clock here. So what this does is necessarily, depending on if the clock is high or if the clock is low, it will send this or this into the transparent and enabled state, rather. So into the enabled / transparent or the locked state. So if the clock is off, as you can see, then this back latch is transparent. We can see that, right? So when the clock is off, that back latch is just transparent. When the clock is off, this front latch is locked. So whatever happens to its input won't affect the output of the overall gate, the overall flop, which is this. When the clock is, I'll turn this on so we don't get too confused here for a second. When the clock is on, then it switches. Now this front latch becomes transparent, but the back one is disabled and thus locked in whatever that value was. So now again, we can change whatever this is, and because the value is now locked in here, and this is not allowing new data in, but this is just allowing whatever was locked in to go through, now we still have our locked in value. And so with that, we can disable the clock, and the falling edge will not trigger a change, because all we'll be doing when we switch to from a high to a low is we will continue to lock in the value here, and then allow this to be transparent. But this will be locked before the 0 makes it here. And so then it'll just stay on. So we don't have to worry about the falling edge triggering a change. Now, the rising edge, so if the data is off, which is different from the output, the rising edge what it will do, right, is as we have the 0 being passed through to the front D latch, when we go rising edge, we will enable this front latch to pass through this 0. And we will lock in that 0 into this back latch as we're enabling the clock. So this will be locked, and this will be passing through that locked value, which is a 0. That'll change our output on the rising edge. And then, since it's locked, it doesn't matter what we do. Doesn't matter if that's on and the falling edge changes. Doesn't matter. It's just it pushed through that, and now it's locked, and it's a fucking D flop. So this is, to think about this on this level of abstraction is just like, I feel as if I finally figured something out, basically, because it actually makes sense to think about in terms of just switching transparent and locked, transparent and locked between the clock. Like, that's all it's doing. Maybe you could even think about it as being like a 2-bit shift register or something, if that would, that just came to my mind right now. Maybe that's something to think about. But I'm not going to think too hard about that. So, not yet. So in any case, that is this whole thing, right? Is this, but like, I actually just can't follow this. It's too much. It's way too much. So, I mean, I'm sure I could with like a few hours of time, I guess, and drawing it all out, but it just was not making sense. What the fuck was happening? So I don't know. This explains it to me. And again, the point being that now I don't have to rely on a tiny pulse to get an edge triggering, right? So that's what I had made here, is just a simple pulse generator on the rising edge, and that worked, but it's not as clean, I think, as the real good way to do it, which I believe this is probably just the better way. Anyway, this video is way too long, so note to self,